we now go across to our guest who's joining us here on the show, Major General Dwivedi. Many thanks, sir, for speaking with NDTV. Now, we've spoken about soft diplomacy, cultural diplomacy that will be seen through the celebration of International Yoga Day that is going to take place tomorrow. But apart from the soft diplomacy, there are hardcore defense issues that the two sides will be discussing as well. There are two major announcements in the defense sector alone that we are looking at, sir. One is the joint production of the GE jet engines that are likely to be used in HAL's latest version of light combat aircraft, and India will be buying the drones from the United States. That announcement is also likely to be made on the 22nd of June. What I want to understand from you, sir, is the purchase of defense equipment, even though India wants to now go the Make in India way, is the purchase still something that we can't wish away? We have to continue doing that till there are more joint productions and technology transfer.
Well, Maha, firstly, pleasure to be on NDTV and also co-hosting from New York. I am in Manhattan, so therefore it's a pleasure to be with you, and you too are in New York. Well, first and foremost, I think defense is one of the very important pillars of Indo-US partnership and our relationship. So therefore, I think in this visit also, the defense is very high on the agenda. Now, the two deals you mentioned, one is the GE engines F414, they're the turbofan engines, which will actually be, fitted up, or that will be one which will power our LCA Mark II and also the future generation aircraft, whether you call fifth generation aircraft. One of the, deficit in our aero industry was that we were not able to get the right engine. In fact, I remember when I was young, India had started HF-24 project, and we got a Egyptian engine, but that aircraft was under par. So therefore, this is a very important facet, because after all, the aircraft are as good as they are powered with what engine, what are the avionics, and what are the weapon systems on the aircraft. Secondly is the MQ-9, the Predator. This is the drones, which are armed drones. And, lately in the warfare, the drones have played a very important role, whether you take the Azerbaijan, Armenian, they had the clashes and skirmishes. And today in Ukraine, you see that drones are playing very, very important role. And therefore, I think these two deals are very critical in our defense partnership. But just to give you perspective, in 2009, 2010, India-US defense deals were hardly in few hundred millions. And today they stand at 20 billions. So therefore, you can see that what sort of progress have been made in defense cooperation in last about a decade. Now, coming to your question per se, you see, defense manufacturing is a very complex process. It requires a complete ecosystem, that is industry, and especially private players have to play a great role. Of course, government has to set the stage, then academia has to come in, and all this have to be put together. And primarily, a country has to have a very wide and strong industrial base, and that's going to take some time, and may take another decade or so. Until then, we have to keep going for the purchases, but with a clause that we will entail transfer of technology, because once the technology is transferred, then you are able to manufacture within the country, and even these deals will have certain amount of component to manufacture the system within a country. Maha, over to you.
All right, General Dwivedi, we will come back to you. We are also going to be joined. In fact, we have already been joined by Dr. Zakir Hussain, foreign policy expert, and was with the Indian Council of World Affairs. I'll come back to both my guests, but before that, let's quickly, and I also want to apologize for all this audio disturbance. As you can see, that major audio disturbance I turned around and realized was because of the security arrangements that are being made here right behind us, the barricading that is being done at the hotel where the PM will be staying. But before that, let's take a look at New York itself. Now, we are taking the Prime Minister will be leading the International Yoga Day events here at the UN headquarters. the question that many people ask is in the current times, when we are seeing the Ukraine war going on, when we saw that UN acted, as many people believe, not very satisfactorily in the first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic, what is the relevance of the United Nations in this time and era? It's almost an 80-year-old organization now, but countries like India have been pressing for reforms in the United Nations. And as the Prime Minister leads the International Yoga Day celebrations, the big question to ask is, why are some countries stalling the reforms in the United Nations? And why should not the United Nations Security Council be expanded to include a country like India, something that India has been rightfully asking for? I've just cut that down into 5 points to explain why India deserves a place in the UNSC as a permanent member. Watch this report of mine. The United Nations is now almost an 80-year-old organization, and for it to remain relevant, it desperately needs reforms. And one such reform can be to include more members as permanent members of the Security Council. And here, India deserves a place at the high table. The first reason, and the most important one, is very obvious, that for the UN to itself remain a credible organization, it needs to include more member countries as permanent members, and not just have 5 members with veto powers where they can scuttle any discussion that they do not want. Secondly, India represents over 17% of the world population. It is the 5th largest economy now and has left behind a country like Britain as well, the UK being a P5 member itself. Moreover, there is growing acceptance for India's demand. Apart from China, all other P5 members are in agreement that India does deserve a place in the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member. And finally, India has made great contribution through the UN peacekeeping mission. A mission where India has sent over 2 lakh of its soldiers. And in 2007, India also sent an all-women's contingent to Liberia. Let me go across to Dr. Zakir Hussain now. Dr. Hussain, why is India still not a full member or a permanent member of the UNSC, despite all the points that I've just laid out? And most importantly, times have changed. UN needs reforms. Why is this being stalled?
Thank you for your invitation. India does not lack any credential as per your reports, but the world power are not interested to democratize the international orders. That's why they are not putting India into the order. If our relation with the United States, with France, with Russia are so strong, then we can expect our entry in UNSC. So this is the issue of international order, which they are not going to liberalize it. And if we are, as such, India has all credential to become the member of UNSC. This is only, to my understanding, this is the only point where we need support of United States. And during this visit, I expect that President Biden is going ahead of the verbal commitment of President Obama that India should become the permanent member of UNSC. This will be a landmark achievement, and only then we can play a very positive role and pursue an independent foreign policy in world arena, including Indo-Pacific and other places. This is very important for us at this juncture. And I expect that President Biden should make such an arrangement, because our relation with France is very good, our relation with Russia is very good, and our relation with USA is booming. So this is the only reason which I find that India is not getting a place there. And it is very important to boost India's position in order to check China.
Yeah, I'm turning attention now to our other guest who's joining us here. That is Bhaskati Mukherjee, a former Indian diplomat. Many thanks, ma'am, for speaking with NDTV. I'll begin by asking you about India's global stature that has been going up over the last many years. And many believe, and India firmly believes, that it deserves a place in the UNSC as a permanent member. We've just finished our 2-year tenure as a non-permanent member. Is China the biggest hurdle, considering that it is one of the P5 members and has this power of veto as well?
You're absolutely right, and it gives me great pleasure to see a charming young Indian lady standing in front of that iconic UNO, where I spent 3 years of my life working for India there. The biggest hurdle is China, but we've been able to surmount it in many ways. You talked about the International Yoga Day, which was brought about by our Prime Minister some years ago in his first term. That International Yoga Day is now commemorated all over the world, including in countries like Saudi Arabia, etc., and demonstrates India's soft power outreach, while Prime Minister Modi's United States bilateral visit demonstrates India's hard power outreach, and also demonstrates that a permanent Security Council membership without India renders the Security Council meaningless, which is why the Security Council is not able to cope with its own stresses. For example, the Ukraine conflict, when you have P5 countries fighting against each other, and countries like India that have emerged, that are chair of G20, are not in as permanent members. We have to sometimes wait for 15 to 20 years to become a non-permanent member, which is what happened to us last time when we just left it in last December. So yes, it's time for reform, and if there is an increasing clamor, as there is, for India's membership in the General Assembly, and if all the other P5 countries agree as they have, except for China, certainly at some point, in my perspective, China will have to relent, because China cannot by itself forever block India's entry as a permanent member. So that day will surely come, and I hope it comes soon. But in the meantime, the International Yoga Day and Prime Minister Modi going there demonstrates how much India's soft and hard power both have come of age, and how much they are challenging China's soft and hard power globally and in the region.
Also, what I'd like to know from you, ma'am, is that UN itself, many people believe that it lacks the kind of foresight or the kind of merit that it should have had to take forward the world during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, that it was not able to match up to the mandate that it has. Even on the issue of Ukraine war, the United Nations Security Council is expected to maintain peace and stability across the world. What is the relevance then of the UN in the current time?
Well, this is being increasingly challenged, as you rightly pointed out. First of all, as far as economic power is concerned, the P5 represents, except for China, the victorious powers of World War II. But those powers have now declined in stature, both politically and economically, and others that have risen are denied a place at the high table. When you talk about the Ukraine conflict is a classic example of P5 countries fighting among themselves, which is why the options for ending the conflict or looking for a ceasefire are increasingly being looked at outside the permanent members of the Security Council. That's why you had a delegation of African leaders going to Kiev and Moscow. What does it show? It shows that the UN Security Council has been unable to agree on a single initiative to end the conflict. So you have powers outside, and many have suggested that India should play its legitimate role in trying to end the conflict, considering that our Prime Minister had already said that this is not an era of war, and we currently are both chairmen of the G20 and the SCO. So, and we have brought under Prime Minister Modi the voice of the Global South. Where is the voice of the Global South in the UN or in the Security Council? The Security Council does not have a single African country, a single Latin American country. It doesn't have India. It doesn't have an Arab country. It is completely non-representative. So unless they reform themselves, you would find the solutions being looked at and examined outside the Security Council. That is happening right now, whether it's the Quad or the G20.
Right.
These are mechanisms which have come
Right.
up outside the Security Council to address the power vacuum which is there inside the Security Council. Which you summed up also very well in
That's
your
right.
presentation.
Very briefly, ma'am, I'd like to... Yes, very briefly, ma'am, I'd also want to ask you about the power of soft diplomacy. Yoga is one of the most influential cultural exports of India. What role does soft diplomacy play in the entire ambit of diplomacy?
Soft diplomacy is a very important element of diplomacy. When I joined Foreign Service in 1976, we were told that what matters is hard power, not soft power. But that is completely wrong. Soft power and hard power go together. And soft power actually ensures that when there is a conflictual situation, a country can use its soft power to persuade a conflict to end. So the two go together. As far as India is concerned, India has used soft power, whether it's yoga or its diaspora or its cultural and civilizational connect or its unity in diversity, or the fact that it has demonstrated that for millions of years it has seamlessly existed without colonization, without aggression, and it has lived within its own borders in peace and harmony. So I think that we are all very proud to be Indians and to bring to New York and to bring to the United Nations our unique cultural and civilizational heritage, including yoga, and to demonstrate that it is possible for countries to live, as we say, as Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, because India has demonstrated that in the manner in which it has seamlessly existed for civilization without committing aggression or colonization. It's actually an example of how the world should live in future in peace and harmony.